It happens almost every Sunday. The family gathers around the dinner table. Everyone is talking. Someone is laughing. Children are running through the house. Stories are being shared. And in the middle of all the noise, there's one man sitting quietly. He smiles. He nods. He listens. But he hardly says a word. Nobody finds it strange anymore. That's just who he is. Quiet. Reserved. Always listening. Never speaking unless someone asks him directly. Most people assume they understand men like him. They think he's shy. They think he's antisocial. Or maybe they think he simply has nothing to say. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the quietest man in the room is actually carrying the loudest thoughts? You've probably met someone like this. Maybe it's your father. Maybe your grandfather. Maybe your coworker. Or maybe it's you. He never interrupts people. He doesn't argue over small things. He avoids unnecessary drama. While everyone else is trying to be heard, he's watching. Listening. Paying attention. To understand this kind of silence, we have to go back much earlier. Imagine a young boy sitting in a classroom. He finally gathers the courage to answer a question. A few classmates laugh. The teacher quickly moves on. Another day, he tries to explain how he feels at home. Someone interrupts him. Stop complaining. Be a man. You worry too much. Little by little, he begins learning something without anyone ever teaching it directly. Speaking up feels risky. Staying quiet feels safe. Years pass. The classroom disappears. Childhood ends, but the lesson stays exactly where it was. Now he's a grown man. He still has ideas, dreams, opinions, questions. But before speaking, his mind automatically asks, is it worth saying? Most of the time, the answer becomes no. Psychologists have found that repeated negative social experiences can shape how people communicate later in life. When someone repeatedly feels ignored, criticized, or misunderstood, they often become more cautious about expressing themselves. Silence becomes less of a personality trait and more of a protective habit. Ironically, quiet men are often paying more attention than anyone else in the room. While others focus on what they're going to say next, they're observing body language, facial expressions, changes in tone. Small details most people never notice. Research suggests that people who spend more time listening often process information more deeply before responding. That's why when they finally speak, their words usually carry weight. They've already thought about them long before anyone else. But silence also has another side. Sometimes, it slowly builds walls. The quiet man doesn't tell anyone he's stressed. He doesn't mention the pressure at work. He doesn't explain why he hasn't been sleeping. When someone asks if everything is okay, he simply smiles. I'm good. Not because he is. Because it's easier than explaining everything happening inside his mind. Day after day, those unspoken thoughts begin piling up. Imagine carrying a backpack. At first, someone places one small stone inside. It barely feels heavy. Then another. Then another. Disappointment, responsibility, fear, regret, loss. Years later, the backpack feels impossible to carry. But because you've worn it for so long, you forget it was never supposed to be that heavy. The hardest part is that nobody else can see the weight. They only see the silence. Some people mistake quietness for confidence. Others mistake it for weakness. In reality, it's often neither. Sometimes it's simply the result of years spent believing that staying quiet is the safest choice. Healthy silence brings peace. It allows people to think, to reflect, to understand. Unhealthy silence does the opposite. It creates distance, misunderstandings, loneliness. Real wisdom isn't about talking all the time, and it isn't about staying silent all the time either. It's knowing when your voice deserves to be heard. If someone in your life is always quiet, don't assume they have nothing to say. Sometimes, they've simply spent years believing nobody wanted to hear it. And if you're that quiet man, remember this: your thoughts matter. Your experiences matter. The people who truly care about you aren't waiting for perfect words. They're simply waiting to hear your voice. Because sometimes, one honest conversation can say more than years of silence ever could. But there's something even more surprising. Not every quiet man was born that way. Some were once energetic, talkative, curious, the kind of person who could make an entire room laugh. Then, life happened. A betrayal, a painful breakup, a friendship that ended without explanation, a dream that never became reality. One disappointment rarely changes a person, but enough disappointments can change how they see the world. Slowly, they begin speaking less, not because they've stopped feeling, because they've learned that not every feeling will be understood. For many men, silence becomes a place to hide, not from other people, but from disappointment itself. If nobody knows what you're thinking, nobody can judge you. If nobody knows what you're hoping for, nobody can destroy it. It feels safer that way. But safety often comes with a price. The quieter someone becomes, the easier it is for others to misunderstand them. People assume they're angry, cold, uninterested, arrogant, when in reality, they're simply protecting parts of themselves they've never learned to share. Think about the strongest friendships you've ever seen. They weren't built on perfect conversations. They were built on honest ones. The same is true for families, for marriages, for every meaningful relationship. People don't connect because someone talks the most. They connect because someone is willing to be real. That's something many quiet men struggle with. Not because they lack emotion, but because they've spent years translating every emotion into silence. Imagine standing in the middle of a crowded room. Everyone is speaking. Everyone wants to be heard. Yet somehow, you feel completely invisible. Loneliness isn't always about being alone. Sometimes, it's about feeling unseen while surrounded by people. Researchers have found that meaningful social connection plays a major role in emotional well-being. It's not the number of conversations we have that matters most. It's whether we feel understood during them. A single honest conversation can be more healing than 100 casual ones. Maybe that's why some of the quietest people light up the moment they meet someone who truly listens. Not someone waiting for their turn to speak, someone genuinely listening. Because for the first time, they don't feel pressured to explain everything. They simply feel accepted. If you're naturally quiet, you don't have to become the loudest person in the room. You don't have to change your personality. Silence itself isn't a flaw. Some of the wisest people in history spent more time listening than talking. The goal isn't to speak more. The goal is to stop hiding behind silence when your heart needs to be heard. And if someone in your life rarely speaks, be patient with them. Some people don't open up because they're difficult. They open up slowly because life taught them to be careful. Trust is built one conversation at a time. One question, one answer, one moment of understanding. Because behind many quiet men isn't an empty mind. It's a full one, filled with memories, questions, dreams, fears, and words they've simply never felt safe enough to say out loud. There's one final truth that often goes unnoticed. Silence doesn't only affect the person who chooses it, it affects everyone who loves them. A wife begins wondering if she's done something wrong. A son starts believing his father doesn't want to talk to him. Friends slowly stop asking questions. Not because they don't care, because they assume the answer will always be the same. I'm okay. And after hearing it enough times, they stop asking. That's how distance quietly grows. Not through arguments, not through anger, but through conversations that never happened. Imagine two people standing on opposite sides of a river. Neither of them wants to lose the other. But neither takes the first step to build the bridge. Every day they wait. The river feels a little wider. Silence often works the same way. The longer it lasts, the harder it becomes to break. But here's what many people don't realize. Opening up isn't about saying everything. It's about saying one honest thing. I've been stressed. I've been struggling. I don't know what to do. Simple words. Yet for someone who's spent years hiding behind silence, they can feel incredibly difficult. And that's okay, because courage isn't measured by how loudly someone speaks. Sometimes, courage is measured by the sentence they've been afraid to say. Think back to the little boy we talked about earlier, the one who learned that staying quiet kept him safe. He did what he needed to survive. There was nothing wrong with that, but he's not that little boy anymore. The world around him has changed. The people around him have changed. Maybe it's time for the story he tells himself to change too. Strength isn't pretending you have no emotions. Wisdom isn't carrying every burden by yourself. Real confidence comes from knowing that being understood doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. If you're watching this, and you've spent years sitting in silence, start small. You don't have to change overnight. You don't have to become someone you're not. Just choose one person you trust. One conversation. One honest moment. You may discover that the people who care about you were never expecting perfection. They were simply hoping you'd let them in. And if someone in your life is that quiet man, don't rush him. Don't pressure him. Just keep showing up. Keep listening. Keep reminding him that his voice matters. Because sometimes, the quietest people carry the heaviest stories. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is giving someone the space to finally tell theirs.